It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon at the airport. Passengers strolled between gates. Families argued over boarding passes, and the echo of rolling luggage blended with overhead announcements. Nothing hinted at trouble. Nothing warned anyone that 10 heavily tattooed men were minutes away from tearing through the terminal and surrounding a woman holding a baby. No one understood why they targeted her, and what followed shook the entire terminal. 10 armed thugs surrounded a poor woman at the airport, never realizing her husband was the city's most ruthless mafia boss. What happened next changed everything. The airport continued its usual rhythm. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows and formed warm reflections across the polished floor. Travelers hurried in every direction with the single-minded purpose of catching their flights. It looked like any ordinary moment. Yet as Irene Navarra stepped into the terminal clutching her baby, she felt a chill she could not explain. Her suitcase bumped gently behind her, its wheels wobbling from age and overuse. The dark circles under her eyes revealed nights of restless sleep and days of walking through unfamiliar towns while trying not to be noticed. She whispered soft words to her child and forced a smile, hoping to keep the little one calm. The more she walked, the more her heart tightened. Something felt wrong. It was not the noise around her. It was not the crowds. It was something else. Something unseen, something quiet, something closing in. Her eyes shifted toward the baggage claim area. 2 men she had not noticed before seemed to linger without purpose. Another stood near a vending machine and pretended to read the glowing display. Irene swallowed as her instincts sharpened. She had been on the run long enough to sense danger long before anyone else noticed it. She lifted her baby higher and tried to blend into a group of travelers. But the sense of being hunted followed her. She kept walking, her breaths becoming shallow and slow. Then the change happened. It was small at first, too subtle for the average traveler to detect. A shift in the air, a sudden hush in her chest, a prickling sensation at her back. 10 men began moving through the terminal with quiet coordination. They did not weave through the crowd like everyone else. They glided in a straight line, eyes fixed forward, boots hitting the floor with a pattern that felt practiced. Passengers stepped aside instinctively, unsure who these men were. Some assumed they were law enforcement because of how deliberate their formation looked. Irene noticed them the moment they entered the hall. Her stomach dropped. Her grip on the baby tightened. She whispered a prayer under her breath, something trembling and desperate. The men quickened their pace. She took a step backward. They took 2 steps forward. Her pulse kicked like a trapped animal as she turned to retreat, but the nearest exit suddenly seemed too far away. She was boxed in by travelers, by luggage, by everything she did not have time to push through. The first thug closed the distance. Then the second. Then all 10 broke through the crowd at the same time. Gasps erupted as they formed a tight circle around Irene. The movement was so swift that several passengers stumbled back in shock. No one dared step closer. No one understood what they were witnessing. Guns were raised, tucked low against their bodies, but unmistakable. A heavy silence fell across the terminal. Irene's breath trembled. Her baby whimpered, sensing her fear. One of the men stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes that looked as cold as river stone. He scanned Irene from head to toe and spoke in a harsh whisper. "Give us the suitcase." Irene pulled the baby closer, as if she could shield the child from the danger closing in around them. She took a slow step backward, but there was nowhere to go. The circle tightened, cutting off every possible escape. Travelers nearby froze, their hands raised in instinctive surrender. Security guards hesitated, unsure if they were witnessing a robbery or something far more complicated. The baby began to cry. The sound echoed painfully through the tense silence and caused more heads to turn. Irene swallowed, her throat dry, her eyes burning with panic. She tried to steady her breathing. She knew she could not reveal anything. Crespo had trusted her. Crespo had warned her. Crespo had begged her to stay hidden until he returned. But she also knew he would come if he sensed even a flicker of danger. She prayed. He already knew. The leader of the thugs stepped even closer. The suitcase. Now. Irene shook her head. Please, I do not have anything valuable. Let me pass. That answer did not satisfy him. His jaw clenched. His fingers tightened on the gun at his side. He flicked his gaze at the man nearest her. Take it. Passengers gasped when the thug lunged and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. Irene held on desperately and tried to pull it back, but she was no match for his strength. He yanked it from her grip with a brutal force that jolted her entire arm. Her child cried harder. Irene reached out as if she could reclaim the suitcase, but another thug pointed his gun at her baby. The barrel hovered too close, the threat too terrifying to absorb. Everything inside Irene froze. The terminal fell completely silent. People held their breath. Even the announcements seemed to pause. The thug with the gun sneered. If you do not cooperate, we will take more than the suitcase. Terror washed over Irene in a crushing wave. She felt the weight of Crespo's secret pressing against her ribs. The coded ledger inside that suitcase could cripple entire factions. It held the names of allies who believed in Crespo. It held the truth about who trusted him and who feared him. Losing it meant losing everything he had built. But none of that mattered compared to the gun pointed at her child. Her knees trembled. Her voice cracked. Please, do not hurt my baby. A woman nearby screamed and covered her mouth. Security officers tried to approach, but froze when the thugs raised their weapons in warning. The tension grew thick, suffocating. Irene felt her heart pounding painfully in her ears, each beat screaming for help. She did not know that help was already inside the building. She did not know 3 disguised enforcers were standing among the crowd, waiting for the right moment to strike. She did not know Crespo himself had already been alerted by the emergency trigger hidden in her bracelet. She did not know the storm speeding toward the airport was coming for her. All she knew was the cold barrel of a gun and the helpless cry of her child. The leader leaned close enough for her to feel his breath. You should have cooperated. He lifted his hand to signal something to the others. Irene shut her eyes, and then the moment cracked. 3 passengers who had been standing suspiciously still shifted their weight at the same time. Their eyes locked. Their hands dropped to their sides with disciplined control. Not yet. Their signal was not for this chapter. For now, the world stood still. The thug holding her suitcase stepped back, ready to open it. The thug with the gun leaned even closer to her crying child. The crowd held their breath, and Irene Rivera, exhausted and terrified, could only whisper one trembling plea. Please, someone help me. The suitcase was ripped from her. The gun edged even closer to her baby, and the entire terminal watched in horror, unaware that the woman they believed to be helpless was married to the most feared man in the city. The circle around Irene pulsed with danger as the thugs tightened their grip on the terminal. Her baby whimpered helplessly against her shoulder. The man holding her suitcase knelt and snapped the locks open, his rough fingers digging against the metal. Gasps rose from the crowd. Irene felt herself growing faint, caught between terror and disbelief. The lid lifted a few inches. Before she could see what was inside, Irene's mind dragged her backward to the moment everything began to fall apart. The trouble had started 2 nights earlier. Crespo and Rivera paced their living room with the controlled fire of a man who had been betrayed by his own shadow. Irene watched him from the doorway, her child asleep in her arms, while he read a message on his phone with a murderous calm. They think they can corner me, Crespo said. His voice carried no rage. It carried something colder. Someone wants what I built. They want it fast without working for it. Irene stepped closer. You have survived worse. You always do. Crespo stopped pacing. He looked at her with something soft beneath the steel in his eyes. This is different. They are not coming after my men. They are coming after my blood. You. Irene's breath caught. Me? You and the baby are their easiest targets. They know it. I will not let them reach you. He took her hand gently, then pulled her closer. The scent of smoke and leather followed him, familiar and protective. She leaned into him, feeling the tension in his shoulders. What do you want me to do? She whispered. His jaw tightened. Leave the city. Tonight. Her heart clenched. Without you. For a short time. His hand moved to her cheek. I need to clean what has been corrupted. I cannot do that if I am worrying about your safety every minute. She lowered her gaze. She hated his world. She hated the violence, the secrecy, the invisible walls that kept her trapped between fear and loyalty. Yet she loved Crespo deeply, even when everything inside her begged for a quieter life. Crespo turned and walked to the dining table, where a small velvet box waited. He opened it and removed a delicate bracelet made of thin silver links. "Wear this for me," he said. "It is beautiful," she breathed. He fastened it around her wrist, but the expression in his eyes made her pause. It was not simply a gift. It was something more. "What is it really?" she asked. "A tracker," he answered quietly. "An emergency signal. If anything goes wrong, it tells me exactly where you are." She frowned and looked down at it. "You could have told me earlier. I did not want you frightened." He touched the bracelet lightly. "I need to know you're safe. This is the only way." Irene looked into his eyes and saw fear hidden deep within them. Not fear of his rivals. Not fear of a coup. Fear of losing her. "I will go," she whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, as if a burden had been momentarily lifted. Then he took their baby from her arms and pressed a kiss to the child's forehead. The moment held a tenderness rarely seen from him, a tenderness he reserved for only two people on earth. She packed quickly. Necessities, baby formula, a few clothes. The suitcase felt heavier than usual, though she had not added much. Crespo had placed something inside while she was in another room, but he said nothing about it. She did not ask. She trusted him, even when fear urged her to demand answers. Before she left, Crespo wrapped his arm around her waist and held her longer than usual. "Stay alert, Irene. Until I fix this, danger can come from any direction." She promised she would. She had no idea how true his warning would become. Her journey out of the city had been anything but simple. At the train station, she noticed two men watching her too closely. One whispered into a phone as she passed, his eyes following her with a predatory calm. She changed platforms 3 times before boarding. Hours later, while switching transport again, she saw the same men appear on the opposite side of the terminal. Panic pushed her forward. She slept only in fragments, sometimes in waiting rooms, sometimes on benches, once in a crowded bus filled with crying children and restless travelers. Her baby fussed through the night, hungry or tired or simply overwhelmed. Irene soothed gently while fighting her own exhaustion. Her reflection in the airport windows had grown more distressed each day. Pale skin, tired eyes, hair hastily tied, clothing wrinkled from hurried escapes and cramped seats. She looked like a woman running from shadows she could not outrun. By the time she stepped into the airport on the morning of the attack, she felt physically drained but hopeful that she had moved far enough away from danger. She believed Crespo had no way of knowing exactly where she was. She believed she was on her own. She did not know the bracelet on her wrist had already alerted him the moment the men surrounded her. She did not know Crespo was watching her location shift across a screen in real time, his fear turning into something lethal. She did not know he was already on his way. She only knew the present moment. The guns, the ring of thugs, the suffocating fear. A loud snap pulled her back to reality. The thug had finally opened the suitcase. His face changed instantly. He stared at the contents, eyes narrowing, confusion melting into recognition, recognition melting into something far more dangerous. He muttered something to the man beside him, too low for Irene to hear. Another thug leaned over the suitcase and recoiled as if he had just seen a curse staring back at him. Their expressions turned tense, agitated, furious. Passengers holding their breath began whispering. The circle tightened. Irene's heart climbed into her throat. She held her baby closer, unable to stop trembling. "What is this?" the leader hissed. The men surrounding him shifted uneasily. Whatever they saw inside that suitcase, it was not money. It was not clothing. It was not anything an ordinary woman would carry. It was something much worse. Something they had been hunting. Something they were willing to kill for. The leader snapped his head toward Irene, his expression sharpened by rage. "You," he growled. "You have no idea what you are carrying." Irene's pulse hammered painfully. She had no answer. She had no breath. She had no way to escape. The man holding the suitcase suddenly stood and shouted to the others. This is it. She has it. The entire circle exploded into frantic urgency, and the terminal plunged deeper into fear as the thugs prepared to seize the very thing that could destroy Crespo Navarra's entire empire. The thugs crowded tighter around Irene as their agitation grew. Passengers shrank back, clutching bags, frozen between fear and confusion. The leader jabbed a finger at the open suitcase, his teeth clenched as if the sight inside had set fire to his nerves. You thought you could walk out with this? He snarled. Irene felt her knees weaken. I do not know what you think I have, but this is just my suitcase. The leader whipped the lid fully open. A thick black book lay inside, its cover unmarked except for a narrow metallic strip that glinted under the fluorescent lights. The pages were lined with symbols Irene did not recognize. The men seemed to know exactly what it was. You expect me to believe you grabbed this by accident? One of them snapped. Another thug pulled the ledger out and flipped through its coded entries. He frowned, confused, then shoved it toward the leader. It is real, he muttered. He kept every name in here. The leader's voice turned cold. Crespo finally slipped, and she must have taken it. The words hit Irene like ice. They thought she stole something from Crespo. They thought she was nothing more than leverage. They had no idea she was his wife. I did not take anything, she whispered. Her baby whimpered, sensing her fear. The leader stepped closer until his shadow swallowed her completely. Listen carefully. You do not want me asking the same question twice. His eyes dragged over her tired clothes and worn shoes. You are not anyone important. You are not one of Crespo's people. You're nobody. So stop lying. A trembling breath escaped Irene. She kept her gaze low and her voice soft. I do not know what any of that means. I am just trying to travel with my child. A hush spread through the terminal as phones lifted from the crowd. Dozens of passengers recorded the scene, trying to make sense of the armed men circling a shaken woman holding a baby. The thugs noticed the cameras, but none seemed concerned. Their confidence came from ignorance. They believed Irene was powerless. Search the rest, the leader ordered. Another thug rifled through the suitcase, tossing aside baby clothes, formula packets, and a knitted blanket. He found nothing else. Nothing to indicate her connection to Crespo Navarra. Nothing to suggest she was anything more than a frightened civilian. Yet the ledger had convinced them they finally had a way to dismantle the most feared man in the city. Why was this with you? The leader demanded. I told you I do not know, she whispered. His irritation deepened. You expect me to believe Crespo would let some stranger walk around with this kind of information? You are lying. She pressed her baby closer. I swear I am not. Another thug leaned in and spat his theory. Maybe she grabbed it while Crespo was distracted. Maybe she knew he could not follow her out here. The leader nodded slowly. A thief. That makes sense. Irene's pulse throbbed painfully in her ears. She could not reveal the truth. If they knew she was Crespo's wife, the danger would multiply. They would not see her as leverage. They would see her as a key to destroying him. She stayed silent. The leader crouched near her. Then answer me. Where did Crespo hide the backups? Where are the others? I do not know what you mean, she said, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. A thug grabbed her arm roughly. Stop pretending. Her baby cried louder. Irene flinched, terrified they might hurt him. Airport security officers hovered near the edge of the crowd. They whispered into radios, unsure whether to intervene. They saw guns aimed at a mother and child, but they also saw 10 men organized with military precision. They hesitated, trapped between responsibility and fear. A young airport guard finally took a step forward. His voice shook, but he tried to sound firm. Put the weapons down. This is a civilian terminal. You cannot do this here. The leader turned slowly toward him. You should walk away, he warned. The guard's fingers twitched near his belt. I am asking you to lower the guns. A thug marched forward, shoved the barrel of his weapon against the guard's vest, and forced him back with brutal efficiency. The guard stumbled and retreated, hands raised. His face drained of color. I will call for backup. Do that, the leader replied. By the time they arrive, we will be gone. The guard backed away, helpless. The leader returned his attention to Irene. "We are done talking here. She's coming with us." Two men grabbed her by the arms. The leader lifted the ledger and slipped it into his jacket. "We take her somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one can record us." Irene's heart dropped. She tried to pull back, but the men tightened their grip. "I told you, I do not know anything," she pleaded. "Please, let me go. You can tell us the truth somewhere else," the leader said. "There are too many eyes here." The thugs moved to relocate her, pushing through the stunned crowd. People stepped aside quickly, afraid of provoking them. Some cried. Some prayed. Some kept recording, unable to look away. Irene felt her breath grow thin. Panic clawed through her chest. Her fingers trembled around her baby, desperation rising like a tide. She stumbled, and her bracelet slid along her wrist. A soft pulse of light flickered beneath the metal links. She did not see it. The thugs did not see it. No one in the terminal noticed the silent signal triggered by the spike in her heart rate. But miles away, in a dim room lit by a single screen, Crespo Navarra saw it immediately. The tracker on his monitor flashed red. His wife was in danger, and the signal told him exactly where. The operations room was buried deep beneath Crespo Navarra's estate, a place few had ever seen and even fewer survived. It hummed with quiet menace, lit only by walls of monitors and the low, steady pulse of encrypted servers. Crespo stood at the center of it all, reviewing shipment routes and coded reports, his expression unreadable, but his presence commanding the entire room like a gravitational force. Then it happened. A faint vibration pulsed against his wrist, sharp, insistent, unmistakable. His head snapped down. Irene's bracelet. The emergency trigger was active. The room instantly stilled, as if the air itself understood the shift in atmosphere. Crespo tapped his wristband, and Irene's biometric feed burst onto the nearest monitor. Elevated pulse, sporadic oxygen pattern, acute stress level. A red beacon flashed on the map overlay of the airport terminal. She was in danger. Real danger. A slow, controlled breath left his lungs. But the calm that settled over him wasn't peace. It was the quiet before a storm that would drown anyone standing in his way. "Lockdown protocol," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every enforcer in the room froze, then scrambled into motion. Metal shutters slammed over the doors. Communication boards flipped from routine status to blood red emergency mode. His empire sprawling, efficient, deadly reacted to a single signal from a single bracelet worn by a single woman. His woman, that if you're enjoying this story, please hit the subscribe button and drop your comments. On a large screen, her location sharpened. Terminal B, restricted passageway east. Crespo's jaw flexed once. "Pull up airport feeds," he ordered. The screens obeyed, flickering through multiple angles until one camera caught it 3 men surrounding Irene, her suitcase open, her posture rigid with fear she was trying desperately to hide. One thug yanked her by the arm. Another barked questions she clearly couldn't answer. A third hovered near the suitcase, flipping through the coded ledger they had no hope of understanding. Crespo's eyelids dropped to half-mast, but his eyes burned like steel dragged through fire. They dared. They touched her. They terrified her. "Identify them," he said. A pair of analysts the best money and fear could buy typed at furious speed. Facial recognition scanned every frame. A moment later, profiles appeared. Small-time enforcers. Not his. Not affiliated with any of his loyal families. But the insignia on one man's wrist, barely visible when he adjusted his sleeve, Crespo recognized it instantly. A rival faction. One that had been quiet. Too quiet. His suspicion hardened into certainty. "So, this is how they want to play," he murmured, the softness of his tone only emphasizing the lethal edge behind it. He turned to his men. "Unit 3, Unit 6 your closest. Move immediately. Blend in. Tourist attire. Conceal carry with full clearance." "Yes, sir." "Notify airport insiders only at level 1 need to know. Nobody announces anything. Nobody interferes." Screens updated with digital pings as his men changed positions across the city, automatically rerouted toward the airport like wolves scenting blood. Crespo didn't sit. He didn't pace. He simply watched the feet of Irene being dragged toward a narrow hallway, her fear spiking enough to cause the bracelet to send a second alert. Another vibration trembled against his wrist. A shadow crossed his face of darkness that made even his most hardened enforcers keep their distance. One of the men in the footage shoved her forward. Crespo leaned slightly closer to the screen. His fury did not explode. It calcified. It sharpened. A cold, measured violence rolled off him like an invisible tide. "They're trying to take her into a blind spot," one analyst muttered. "No cameras past that door." Crespo already knew. He stood straighter. "Prepare my convoy." His top lieutenant, Ronaldo, blinked in shock. "Boss, personally? It might be a trap." "It is a trap," Crespo replied, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "For them." He strode toward the exit as steel barriers retracted before him. His convoy security, 6 armored vehicles, roared to life above ground. Before stepping through the last blast door, he paused and addressed Ronaldo without turning. "Put the airport feed on my vehicle monitors." "Yes, boss." And Ronaldo, his lieutenant, straightened, sensing the weight of what was coming. Crespo's voice dropped to a tone that could freeze bone. "No one touches her again. Not one of them walks out alive." The blast doors shut behind him with a final, echoing thud. The moment the thugs yanked Irene toward the restricted hallway, the terminal erupted into a storm of confusion. Travelers stumbled backward, clutching their bags and children. Airport staff ducked behind counters. Security officers hovered uncertainly on the edges of the chaos, unsure whether they were facing a coordinated criminal strike or a hostage situation they were too unprepared to control. Irene held her baby tight, her breath shallow, as fear pulsed through her. The leader of the group pushed her forward with a rough grip on her shoulder. His voice was low, sharp, and filled with an urgency she did not understand. "Move faster. The lieutenant wants the ledger before the boss realizes she is missing." Another man spat on the floor. "Crespo will not notice anything for at least an hour." Irene's heart jumped. She kept her eyes on the ground, but her ears caught every word. The baby whimpered softly in her arms. A third thug hissed, "Do not mention Crespo's name out loud. Cameras are everywhere." But it was too late. Irene had heard just enough to piece together a horrifying truth. These men were not random criminals. They were working for someone inside Crespo's world. Someone bold enough to stage a public attack. Someone who wanted Crespo's empire to crumble. Her fingers tightened around her baby. Her steps faltered, but the leader shoved her again. "Keep walking." She swallowed and took another step, trying to stay upright. The suitcase was already in their hands, dragged open earlier with no care for privacy or dignity. Papers had been tossed onto the floor, but the coded ledger remained clutched by one of the men, guarded like treasure. She had never seen the inside of that ledger. Crespo had slipped it into her suitcase the night she left, telling her only that it was safer with her than with him. She had assumed it was filled with business documents. Now she realized its value was far beyond that. The man holding it flipped through the pages, frustration twisting his features. "These symbols make no sense." "Because it is coded," another growled. "Encrypted. Only Crespo and his inner circle can read it." "So how does this help us?" The leader sneered. "We take her. We take the child. Crespo will crack within minutes. He will give us everything." A bolt of fear shot through Irene's spine. She held her baby closer, protective instinct overpowering her trembling. Travelers pressed themselves against walls as the group marched Irene past them. Some filmed with shaky hands. Others whispered in shock. "She is just a mother. Why are they pointing guns at a baby? Where is security?" But security officers had already retreated. Their radios crackled with conflicting instructions. None dared approach armed men who moved with trained coordination and deadly confidence. Irene looked toward a nearby gate, desperate for help. For a single moment, she thought she saw a familiar face in the crowd, someone watching her closely, someone who did not look terrified like the others. The gaze was too steady, too calculating. But before she could study the stranger, the leader, jerked her forward again. "Stop looking around," he snapped. Her boots skidded slightly as they reached the restricted hallway entrance. The lighting grew dimmer here, the foot traffic thinner. Travelers avoided this area, sensing danger even without understanding the situation. Irene felt her pulse hammering. Crespo's world had always felt distant to her, something he kept behind locked doors and coded silences. Now she was standing in the center of it, dragged like a pawn across a battlefield she never asked to enter. She took a steadying breath. "Please, you have the wrong person." The leader stopped walking. His head turned slowly, and he looked her up and down with cold amusement. "You really do not know who you married." His words sliced through her. Another man stepped beside him. "She probably think her husband is just a businessman." Laughter rippled through the group. Irene's chest tightened. The leader continued. "You are carrying something that can break him. Every ally, every loyal soldier, every safe house is written in that ledger. If we get these names to the lieutenant, Crespo's empire collapses in a night." He lifted the ledger slightly for emphasis. Irene's stomach dropped. They intended to destroy Crespo, and she was the key to doing it. Her voice wavered. "Please, I do not know anything about this. Just let me leave." Her plea only annoyed them. "You leave when the lieutenant says you leave," the leader replied. He motioned to the two men flanking her. They tightened their formation, pushing her deeper into the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows across the floor. She tried to shift her body slightly, placing herself between the men and her baby. The infant let out a soft, frightened cry. Irene hushed her gently, though her own hands trembled. Then everything became worse. A man at the back of the group started to slow, glancing over his shoulder. Irene followed his gaze and saw movement in the terminal behind them. People who looked like tourists were shifting their positions, but something about their manner was off. Their posture was too alert, their steps too synchronized. Her breath hitched. Crespo's men. They were here. They did not interfere yet. They blended in, watching, waiting, inching closer. The leader noticed Irene's sudden tension. He grabbed her by the chin. "What are you looking at?" She shook her head quickly. "Nothing." He did not believe her. His eyes narrowed. He reached toward the baby, fingers curling with intent. Panic surged through Irene like fire. "Do not touch her." His smile was slow and cruel. "Then you will tell us what Crespo hid in this ledger." "I cannot. I do not know." "That is too bad." The man to her right stepped forward, raising his gun toward her child with a gesture meant to intimidate, not warn. Irene's scream caught her throat. Behind them, the disguised enforcer stiffened. And in that frozen second, with her fear spiking high enough to send a fresh signal through the emergency bracelet, Irene realized the horrifying truth. These men did not plan to spare her. They did not plan to spare her child. And they would not leave this airport with witnesses. The thug's finger tightened near the trigger. "Hand over everything," he snarled, "or the baby goes first." The threat hung in the air like poison. The thug's fingers were inches from Irene's baby when a sharp, panicked voice cut through the tension. Hey, what are you doing? Leave her alone." A man in a rumpled vacation shirt stumbled into the aisle, clutching a duty-free bag as if it were a shield. His eyes were wide, frantic, too frantic. The thug spun toward him, guns half raised. "Back off," one barked. "This ain't your business." The man trembled, hands raised. Sorry, she's got a child, please, don't hurt them." His voice cracked. His knees shook. He was perfect background noise, another terrified civilian. But Irene's breath hitched. Something about him felt off. Not his clothes, not his expression. His stance, his shoulders, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. He wasn't panicking. He was waiting. The thug nearest the baby reached again, careless, dismissive, assuming no one dared interfere. And that was the switch. The tourist dropped the axe so fast it felt like a gunshot. His fear vanished, replaced by a wolf-like focus. His hand snapped out, catching the thug's wrist with a speed that didn't belong to any ordinary traveler. A twist sharp, precise, the weapon clattered to the floor before the thug even understood what happened. "What the?" The man grabbed the thug by the collar, yanked him forward, and slammed his head into a metal column with one brutal strike. The thug collapsed instantly. Screams erupted in the terminal. The other thugs panicked. Several fired shots upward, bullets shattering ceiling panels and raining sparks onto the floor. Travelers scattered, diving behind benches, kiosks, and luggage carts. Security retreated again, radios crackling with confusion. Chaos exploded like a bomb. And across that chaos, Crespo's shadows emerged. Men and women who had appeared to be tourists busy checking phones, pretending to argue with spouses, juggling backpacks suddenly shifted their footing. Their eyes sharpened, their movements aligned with chilling precision. The trap was closing. Irene clutched her baby protectively, pressing her back against a luggage trolley. Her heart pounded so violently the bracelet on her wrist vibrated with the emergency alert she didn't know she'd triggered minutes earlier. Shots cracked through the air. Down, the disguised enforcer barked, shielding her with his body as he retrieved the dropped pistol with fluid confidence. Stay low, Senora. Keep the baby's head covered. Another thug fired blindly in their direction. The enforcer answered with 2 controlled shots, forcing him to retreat behind a magazine stand. Then, all around the terminal, hidden enforcers struck. One woman in a flight attendant scarf swept the legs out from a thug, using a rolling suitcase as distraction. Another tourist, an older man with a cane, revealed the cane was actually a collapsible baton, which he swung with bone-breaking accuracy. A young traveler wearing headphones removed them, revealing tiny comms embedded behind his ear as he slid behind a counter and fired 2 silenced rounds. Crespo's people had arrived. Unmistakably, the rival faction realized it, too. It's a setup, one of the remaining thugs yelled. Spread out. Don't let them pin us. But it was too late. Enforcers were everywhere, coordinating silently, moving with lethal efficiency, cutting off every exit. They didn't fire wildly. They didn't panic. They advanced methodically, forcing the rival men into a tightening ring. Irene shifted on her knees, trying to shield her baby's ears from the noise, from the shouting, from the terror. Her muscles ached. Her throat burned. She just needed to keep him safe, nothing else mattered. A hand grabbed her shoulder, and she flinched violently. It's all right, the disguised enforcer said, kneeling beside her. His voice was low, calm, steady. We're moving you to safety. He guided her quickly but carefully, using overturned luggage carts as cover. The air smelled of burned metal and fear. Irene's baby whimpered against her chest, sensing the danger in every tremor. But they were almost to a secure alcove, just a few more steps. Behind them, desperation fueled the rival thugs. They had started the day thinking they were the hunters. Now, they were prey. One of them cursed loudly. Screw this, I'm not dying here. Grab the woman. A cluster of them charged toward Irene and the enforcer. Move, he shouted, pushing her behind a reinforced pillar. Gunfire erupted in a close, vicious burst. Enforcers intercepted the attack, weapons drawn, movements synchronized like a single organism. The air turned thick with gun smoke. Travelers sobbed and crawled to safety. A child wailed somewhere behind the coffee stand. Irene clutched her baby tighter, trying to make herself small. Stay low. Don't run. Don't draw attention. Breathe. Just breathe. The enforcers shielded her with their bodies as they pushed toward a glass-walled security office. One kicked the door open, ushered her inside, and slid a heavy barrier across it. Stay here, he ordered firmly. We'll hold this position until the boss arrives. The boss. Crespo. Her pulse stuttered. Relief and terror tangled in her chest. Outside the glass, the remaining thugs were spiraling into full breakdown rage, fear, and cornered violence, creating a volatile mix. One of them screamed, "They're everywhere. We need to cut the power, cut it now." Before the enforcers could stop him, he dove behind a service hatch, yanked a lever, and the airport dropped into darkness. Instant, suffocating darkness. The lights didn't flicker. They died. A single heartbeat of silence followed. Then chaos surged again. Someone shouted. A gun fired blindly. Glass shattered. And Irene, clutching her baby in the pitch-black room, felt her own breath freeze in her throat as she whispered a trembling prayer. not knowing that help was already minutes away, not knowing that Crespo was coming, not knowing that he was bringing hell with him. Emergency lights stuttered awake above them, bathing the airport terminal in a sickly white glow. The flicker sharpened everything: the broken chairs, the scattered luggage, the circle of thugs, and Irene trembling in the center of it all. Then the doors hissed. A gust of cold night air swept through the terminal, and with it came a silence, so heavy even the hum of the generators seemed to bow to it. Crespo walked in, not rushed, not tense, not loud. He moved with the controlled, deliberate pace of a man who never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. Behind him, several of his most feared men fanned out, dark suits cutting clean lines through the pale light. Their boots echoed slow, unified, unhurried. Travelers scattered instantly. No questions, no hesitation. People moved out of his path the way water parts for a ship twice its size. The thugs froze. Every single one of them. The leader, who had moments earlier been barking orders, went completely still, his swagger evaporating as though ripped from him. His men stood like statues, chest tight, eyes darting anywhere but at the man now approaching them. Crespo's gaze didn't touch them. Not yet. He walked straight to Irene. Her breath hitched. Her knees threatened to buckle. But he placed one steady hand on her shoulder, warm, grounding, unmistakably protective. His eyes swept over her face, tracing the swelling on her cheek, the reddened skin, the tear glistening at the corner of her eye. His jaw shifted once. A tiny movement, but Irene felt the air change around him. "Who?" Crespo murmured, his voice low. "Put their hands on you?" The thugs flinched as if struck. The leader tried to swallow, but it stuck in his throat. "Yes, sir, this is a misunderstanding." Crespo raised one finger. "Barely." The leader's voice died instantly, strangled mid-sentence. Crespo still wasn't looking at him. Instead, he stepped slightly in front of Irene, shielding her with one arm as though she were the only fragile thing in a collapsing world. She tried to speak, to say she was fine, to tell him she could stand, but he shook his head softly. "Not now," he whispered, keeping his eyes forward. The emergency lights flickered again, casting his shadow long across the polished floor. He finally turned his head toward the thugs, and even the air seemed to retreat from his stare. "You touched my family." The leader raised both hands quickly. "We didn't know." She didn't say, "Look, we were just..." "You were just..." Crespo asked quietly. His men spread out, boxing the thugs in without a single spoken command. The sound of boots against tile echoed like distant thunder. The leader's breath quickened. Sweat gathered at his temples. Trying to talk, he offered desperately, forcing a smile that slipped the moment Crespo took one slow step closer. Crespo tilted his head slightly. "You think I'm interested in your words?" The leader shook his head violently. No, of course not. We were only making her cry." Crespo's voice didn't rise. That made it worse. "Only frightening her. Only putting your hands where you should not." One of the thugs behind the leader lost control of his breathing and let out a shaky exhale. Crespo's eyes flicked to him just a fraction of a second. The man went white as paper. "Tell me," Crespo said, "which of you touched her first?" Silence. But it wasn't empty. It was suffocating. Irene gripped his sleeve gently. "Crespo, I'm okay." His hand covered hers immediately, thumb brushing once in reassurance. "A promise." Then, with an edge now cold enough to burn, he said, "No one harms what is mine." The thug's reaction was instant fear, real fear, spread across their faces like ink in water. The leader stepped back, palms trembling. "Please, sir, we don't want trouble." "Trouble," Crespo echoed, the faintest hint of dark amusement in his voice. "You believe what you created here qualifies as trouble." He looked around slowly at the overturned bench, the scattered luggage, Irene's torn sleeve. "This," Crespo said quietly, "is inconvenience." His men tensed, ready to move the moment he gave the slightest hint. The thugs began shaking, one dropping his weapon outright as the metallic clang rang through the terminal. That was when Crespo spoke again, calm, measured, deadly. "Drop your weapons." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even a command. It was simply truth spoken aloud, and the thugs obeyed instantly. Every gun hit the floor. Every knife followed. Metal clattered in a chorus of surrender as the leader stumbled back, eyes wide, hands raised, breath coming in terrified gasps. And Crespo's expression didn't change at all. The thug's weapons still echoed on the tiles when Crespo finally shifted his focus. His hand remained on Irene's back, steadying her, shielding her even now, even after the danger had been forced to kneel. "Bring me the suitcase," he said quietly. One of his men obeyed immediately, dragging the scuffed luggage across the floor and placing it at Crespo's feet. Irene watched as he knelt, unzipped it, and reached inside with absolute precision as though he already knew exactly where to look. He pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. Old, worn, innocent-looking, but the moment Crespo's fingers closed around it, the weight of the entire terminal seemed to shift. Irene blinked. That was in my suitcase. Crespo nodded once, hidden beneath the lining. Her pulse quickened with confusion. Why would you put something like that with me? Why hide it there at all? He stood, the ledger resting in his palm, and looked at her not with guilt, but with something far more complex. A hard truth softened only by the way he cupped her cheek with his free hand. No enemy, Crespo said quietly, would ever imagine you carrying this. She froze. Her mind replayed the thugs' earlier desperation, their frantic demand to search her things, their rage when they found nothing. "You used me," she whispered, voice cracking around the realization. He didn't flinch. Crespo had never been a man who hid from the truth. "I protected it in the safest place I knew. They watch my men. They watch my operations. But you, his jaw tightened. They underestimate you. That makes you the perfect shield." Irene's breath faltered. Perfect shield, or perfect target. Her hand trembled as she touched the ledger. "What's in there?" Crespo looked down at the small book, as if even he respected the danger it held. "Every financial artery of my organization," he said. "The names of the silent partners, the routes, the transfers, the offshore vaults. Everything the rival faction has tried and failed to uncover for years." Irene's stomach dropped. "So, the thugs tonight, they weren't just random criminals? They were dismantling my network piece by piece," Crespo answered. "Or trying to." His eyes darkened. "Until they decided taking you is easier than taking down my men." Irene swallowed hard. The truth settled like ice in her chest. She hadn't just been caught in the crossfire. She'd been the key, the leverage, the crack in the armor they believed they could exploit. A soft curse came from behind them. One of Crespo's enforcers approached, phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from stone. "Boss, we have the rest of the intel." The faction wasn't working alone. Coordinated attacks were planned across the city. They were preparing to hit the headquarters within the next hour. Crespo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Where?" "South Docks, East Compounds, the transport hub, and the financial wing of the estate." Irene's breath hitched. All at once, "Time strikes," the enforcer confirmed. If they had gotten their hands on the ledger, everything would have fallen exactly as they wanted. Crespo didn't hesitate. His tone sharpened, clean and lethal. "Send the first team to the South Docks. No one enters, no one leaves. Take the East Compounds offline now. Divert all transport routes through the reserve corridor. Secure the financial wing with Lockdown Protocol 7. I want every exit sealed." "Yes, boss." The enforcer moved before the last word left his mouth. Crespo gave the next order without turning. "Put a ghost team on every faction leader. I want them watched, traced, suffocated. If they so much as twitch, I'll feel it." The men scattered, phones dialing, boots pounding, orders cascading through the city like steel falling into place. Irene stared at him, at the power, the calculation, the absolute command. And for the first time, it frightened her. When the last enforcer stepped away, she whispered, "Crespo, I don't want to be used like that again. I don't want to be a pawn in all of this." His head snapped toward her instantly. The ledger closed in his hand. In the flicker of the emergency lights, his expression softened not weakly, but with a depth he rarely showed. He stepped closer, thumb brushing a tear she didn't realize had escaped. "You are not a pawn," he said quietly. Not in my world. Not in any world. Her voice trembled. Then why hide something so dangerous with me? Because, Crespo murmured, I trusted you more than any fortress I've built. She shook her head, voice cracking. And look what almost happened. They could have Crespo. They could have hurt the baby. His hand tightened around hers. A shadow of something raw flashed in his eyes. Regret. Fury. Fear he'd never admit aloud. Listen to me. His voice was low, fierce, trembling at its edges despite his control. I will never allow harm to come to you or our child again. Not through my choices. Not through theirs. Not ever. Her breath broke. He stepped closer, hand on her waist, pulling her gently against him. You are the only thing in this world I would protect with my life, he whispered. And I failed you tonight. That will not happen again. Irene closed her eyes, leaning into him, but the moment was shattered by a distant wail. Sirens, growing louder. Crespo's eyes snapped toward the entrance. The airport authorities, he said. And before he could issue a single order, blue and red flashes lit the glass doors, painting the terminal in pulsing color. Blue and red lights washed across the terminal as airport authorities poured in uniforms stiff, radios crackling, but Crespo didn't move. His men stepped forward instead, guiding the officials with a calmness that came from long, carefully paid relationships. One of the officers, a man whose badge gleamed but whose eyes flicked nervously toward Crespo, leaned in to the nearest enforcer. We'll file this as civilian disorder, he said quietly. Your men handle the rest? Crespo's enforcer nodded once. As always. Within minutes, 2 security supervisors were pulled aside, briefed with hushed words, and escorted away. Crespo's payroll made sure the right questions were never asked, the right reports were filed, and the wrong footage simply vanished. The rival thugs, still pale and shaking, were dragged across the floor, their hands bound behind their backs. They didn't dare resist, not after witnessing Crespo's arrival. His men moved with a quiet ruthlessness, lifting the criminals one by one and hauling them toward the service exit. Secure location? One enforcer murmured. Crespo gave a small nod. The underground hold. Full isolation. I want them breathing until I say otherwise. The thugs heard him. The fear in their eyes doubled. As the last of them was shoved through the back corridor, Crespo finally looked to Irene. His coat was already around her shoulders, heavy, warm, smelling faintly of him. She clutched it without realizing. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was fading fast, leaving her legs trembling beneath her. Stay close, Crespo said softly. She didn't argue. 2 of his men flanked her, clearing a path. The terminal still flickered under the emergency lights, every shadow elongated, every sound echoing too loudly. She kept her gaze low, focusing on the feel of Crespo's coat wrapped around her shaking frame. Outside, the night was cold and sharp. Crespo's convoy waited in the private lane, sleek armored vehicles lined in a silent formation. Engines humming, doors open, ready. But before he guided her inside, Crespo turned to his inner circle, his voice shifting back into the steel of command. We move now, he said. Full-scale response. I want every safe house checked, every ally alerted. Lock down our territories. His top lieutenant stepped forward. And the rival faction? Crespo's expression was carved from stone. We strike before they breathe again. Their headquarters? Surround it, Crespo ordered. No gunfire unless necessary. I want the leaders taken alive. Their soldiers neutralized as needed. The men dispersed instantly, vanishing into vehicles, making calls, issuing orders. The war was shifting, tilting, falling under Crespo's hand once again. But Irene stepped in front of him before he could follow. Crespo! He stopped. She took a breath that barely stayed steady. This can't go on. Tonight, those men, your enemies, your world. It's swallowing everything. His jaw clenched. She pushed on. You say you'll protect me. Protect our child. But how can you, when every corner of your life is danger? Crespo looked away for a moment, just long enough for the truth to settle between them. Then he stepped closer, hands cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything happening around them. I built this world, he admitted quietly. Brick by brick, blade by blade. I thought I could control it. His thumb brushed her cheek. But tonight showed me what I refused to see. Irene felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. What's that? She whispered. That the world I built now threatens the only thing I would die to protect. The confession hit her like a slow collapse. His forehead rested against hers, and for a breath the chaos around them faded. Just as warmth. Her heartbeat. The truth between them. You shouldn't have to live like this, Crespo murmured. Not you. Not our child. I will not bring you into war. His hand slid to hers, fingers threading tightly. So I'm ending it. Completely. Irene swallowed. Ow! Crespo straightened. The tenderness remained, but underneath it burned something colder, darker, controlled. By finishing what they started, he said, by taking away every weapon they still think they can use against me. He guided her toward the armored vehicle. The door stood open, a quiet invitation into safety. 2 guards waited beside it, eyes forward, ready. Irene paused at the step, turning back to him. Promise me, she said softly. No more secrets. No more using me to hide things. Crespo's gaze softened just for her. No more secrets, he said. You have my word. She climbed inside, still trembling beneath the weight of everything that had happened. Crespo closed the door gently behind her, his hand lingering on the black steel as though sealing the promise in place. The night wind ruffled his coat as he turned to address his waiting men. They fell silent. Crespo stepped into the open, the pale airport lights glinting off the armored convoy, the cold air sharpening every line of his face. He looked toward the dark stretch of city ahead, the battleground waiting for him. They touched my family, Crespo said, voice low enough to chill every man who heard it. I will end them. And the door of his armored vehicle shut with a final, echoing thud.